Owen Beaulieu was 43 years old, and he had spent the last 9 years believing, with the quiet certainty of a man who builds things for a living, that the people you pour yourself into will eventually recognize what you gave them. He was wrong about that, but he was not wrong about much else, and by the time this story reaches its end, that distinction will matter enormously. On a clear Thursday evening in late September, with the mountains still holding the last copper light of the day and the harbor turning that deep polished gray it turns just before dark, his wife of 11 years threw a manila envelope at his chest in the foyer of their Cole Harbor condominium and told him his services were no longer required. Those were her exact words. Not "we need to talk," not "I want a divorce." His services were no longer required. As though he were a contractor who had completed a renovation and could now pack up his tools and go. What Tanya Beaulieu did not know, what she had been far too busy redecorating her life to investigate, was that the $38 million her father had left her was not a fortune. It was an obligation. Every dollar of it structured through a private irrevocable trust with a single creditor holding full authority to call the entire amount due on demand. That creditor was her husband, the man she had just dismissed in their foyer while wearing a new cashmere wrap he had never seen before, and shoes that cost more than his truck payment. She had thrown out the only person standing between her and financial ruin, and she had done it with the satisfied expression of someone crossing the last item off a to-do list. Before we go any further, if you have ever built something with your own hands and your own money for someone who later looked at you as though you were in their way, stay with this one. It was written for you. Vancouver, late September. The kind of evening when the city smells like salt water and cooling pavement and the faintest trace of wood smoke drifting down from the North Shore. Owen had been on a job site in Burnaby since 5:30 that morning. Foundation work on a mixed-use development that had been giving his engineering team problems for 3 weeks. Soil composition issues, a subcontractor dispute, 2 inspections that needed rescheduling. He had handled all of it the way he handled everything. Standing in the middle of it, sleeves rolled to the elbows, talking to people in the specific unhurried manner of a man who understands that most problems on a construction site are really communication problems wearing hard hats. He drove home in his 2016 Toyota Tacoma. There was a crack in the passenger side mirror he kept meaning to replace. The radio was tuned to CBC, and someone was discussing federal infrastructure spending in a tone that suggested they had strong feelings about it. Owen had a reusable travel mug of cold coffee in the cup holder and a grocery list on his phone. He had planned to pick up dill and sour cream for the pierogies he was making Saturday. His mother's recipe. The one that took 3 hours and was worth every minute. He was thinking about pierogies when the elevator opened onto the 32nd floor and he saw the manila envelope before he saw his wife. It was sitting on the hallway console table, propped against the ceramic vase Tanya's mother had given them as a wedding gift 11 years ago. The envelope was thick, legal-sized, the kind that carries weight in more ways than one. Tanya appeared from the living room, 5'6", dark hair pulled into the high, tight style she wore when she wanted to project authority, new earrings, a silk blouse he had never seen, and in her posture, in the precise angle of her shoulders and the measured distance she kept from him, the unmistakable geometry of a decision already made. Owen. She picked up the envelope and held it out. I have been thinking about this for a long time, and I want to be direct with you. She was always direct. That had never been the problem. I inherited $38 million. She said, the number carefully, the way people say numbers when they want you to feel the size of them. And I have spent the last 4 months looking at my life honestly, and what I see is a woman who has been settling. The word landed in the foyer like something dropped from a height. You are a good man, Owen. She said it the way you compliment a waiter. Sincere enough but fundamentally transactional. You have always been a good man. But I need more than good. I need someone who matches where I am now, where she was now, $38 million worth of somewhere. Owen looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. He looked at her, and what he felt in that moment was not shock. Because psychologically speaking, shock requires surprise, and Owen Beaulieu had not been surprised by his wife's trajectory in quite some time. What he felt was the specific, heavy sadness of a prediction confirmed. The grief that comes not from being blindsided, but from having seen something clearly for months and hoping, against your own better judgment, that you were wrong. You are sure about this? He said it quietly, evenly, the way he spoke to nervous subcontractors and anxious building inspectors. No edge, no performance, I am sure. He nodded once, picked up the envelope, looked at her one more time with the steady, unhurried gaze of a man who had spent 11 years studying someone and had finally accepted the results of the study. Then he went to the bedroom, packed one bag, took his father's old citizen watch from the nightstand drawer, and left. In the elevator, descending 32 floors in silence, he wound the watch once, checked the face. It kept perfect time. It always had. His father, a pipefitter from Trois-Rivières, who had worked 31 years for the same company without ever raising his voice or missing a shift, had given it to him at 20 and said, "A man who knows what time it is never gets lost." Owen had never fully understood that until tonight. Stay with me, because to understand what happened next, we need to go back 6 years, to the winter Owen Beaulieu sold everything he had to save a company that was not his and a man who had become the father he needed. 6 years earlier, Whitfield Marine Services was 90 days from insolvency. The company, founded by Douglas Whitfield in 1981, had grown from a 2-boat operation on the Fraser River into one of British Columbia's most respected marine construction firms. Bridge repairs, harbor infrastructure, coastal engineering, 40 years of showing up in bad weather and delivering clean work. Douglas had built it with his hands and his reputation, and both were calloused in the same way. But the industry had shifted. 2 major contracts fell through in the same quarter. A lawsuit from its subcontractor, frivolous but expensive to fight, had drained the operating reserves. The bank was making phone calls that were no longer polite. Payroll was 3 weeks behind. Tanya was distraught. Douglas was proud, stubborn, and recently diagnosed with early-stage Parkinson's, though he told almost no one, because Douglas Whitfield did not believe in broadcasting difficulty. He believed in solving it. Owen did not make a speech. He sat at the kitchen table of their old apartment in New Westminster on a Sunday morning, opened his laptop, and started running numbers. Then he sold the apartment, cashed out his RRSP, paid the penalty, called in every favor he had accumulated over 14 years in commercial construction across the Lower Mainland. He sat across from 3 senior loan officers at TD and negotiated a restructured repayment schedule that gave the company breathing room without surrendering equity. He did this in a navy sport coat that was slightly too big in the shoulders, because he had lost weight that month from stress he never mentioned. Within 14 months, Whitfield Marine was not only solvent, it was growing. Owen had personally managed the operational turnaround, modernized the project management systems, and secured 2 provincial infrastructure contracts that stabilized the company for years. Douglas Whitfield shook his son-in-law's hand on the front porch of his house in Ladner on a rainy Sunday afternoon and held it for a long time. "You did not have to do any of that, son." "Yes, sir," Owen said. "I did." At Thanksgiving dinner that year, Tanya had leaned against his shoulder and whispered, "I do not know what I would do without you." That was 6 years ago. People change. Or more precisely, people reveal. Douglas's Parkinson's advanced steadily over the following years. He was a stubborn man. BC Granite was softer. He continued coming to the office 3 days a week long, after his neurologist advised otherwise, because Douglas Whitfield understood something about himself that his doctors did not. The work was not separate from the man. Take the work and the man deteriorates faster than any disease can account for. But during those final years, Douglas watched. He was a quiet observer by nature, the kind of man who noticed which server at a restaurant was having a hard day and tipped accordingly. And what he observed in his daughter during those years settled into him like cold water. He noticed that Tanya had stopped asking about the company's operations and started asking about its valuation. He noticed the slow, careful distance she began placing between herself and Owen. Not dramatic, not confrontational, just the incremental withdrawal of attention that, in psychology, is sometimes called emotional disinvestment. A person does not leave all at once. They leave in centimeters, and each centimeter is a decision. He noticed Ryan Fenton. Ryan Fenton was an investment advisor with a downtown office, a leased BMW, and the kind of polished, attentive charm that works extremely well on people who have recently come into money and have not yet learned to distinguish between someone who is interested in them and someone who is interested in what they have. He had met Tanya at a charity gala 14 months before Douglas died. By the time Douglas entered his final months, Tanya and Ryan were no longer bothering to be discreet about their Thursday evening meetings, because they assumed no one who mattered was paying attention. Douglas was paying attention. 4 months before he died, Douglas asked to speak with Owen alone. Tanya was downstairs in the hospital cafeteria, scrolling through real estate listings on her phone. She assumed her father wanted to discuss operational matters. She was partially correct. Owen. Douglas's voice was thin from the Parkinson's, but his eyes were clear. Sit down. I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear the whole thing before you respond. Owen sat. I have restructured the entire estate. Every asset, the company, the properties, the investment accounts, all of it. $38 million, transferred into a private irrevocable trust. The trust carries a matching debt obligation. You are the sole beneficiary and the primary creditor, the only person who can call the debt. Owen was silent for a long time. She is your daughter, Douglas. She is, and I love her more than she will ever understand. But I love this company and everything it represents more than I love her comfort. And I have watched what is coming. I know, my child. He gripped Owen's hand. Do not show your hand. Let her believe what she is going to believe. When she does what I think she will do, step in and protect the legacy. Not for revenge, for preservation. This company fed families for 40 years. It does not deserve to be liquidated to fund someone's idea of the life they think they should be living. Owen looked at the old man in the hospital bed. The tubes, the monitors, the tremor in his hands that never fully stopped now. And behind all of it, the fierce, undiminished clarity of a man who had spent his life reading situations accurately and acting accordingly. Yes, sir, Owen said. I understand. Douglas died on a Tuesday in March. The service was held at Christ Church Cathedral in downtown Vancouver. 400 people. The Premier's office sent a representative. 3 generations of marine construction workers stood in the rain outside because the cathedral was full. Owen delivered the eulogy. Tanya sat in the front pew and checked her phone twice during the service. Both times the screen showed a text from Ryan Fenton. 6 weeks after the funeral, Owen's mother called. Lorraine Beaulieu was 67 years old, born in Gatineau, raised in Sudbury, and had lived in Port Coquitlam for 22 years. She possessed the particular talent of certain mothers to perceive the exact emotional state of their children from any distance, through any wall, across any amount of polite deflection. She had been having lunch at a restaurant in Yaletown with her friend from church when she saw Tanya at a corner table with a man in an expensive suit. Their body language was not ambiguous. Lorraine watched for 90 seconds. She paid her bill. She went home. Then she called her son. Owen, your wife is keeping company she should not be keeping. Owen was sitting in his truck in the parking lot of the Burnaby job site, rain on the windshield, cold coffee in the cup holder. I know, Maman, I am preparing. That night he called Priya Sandhu. Priya Sandhu ran a forensic accounting and litigation practice from a quiet office on West Georgia Street. She wore dark blazers, minimal jewelry, and an expression that communicated, with great efficiency, that she had heard every possible version of every possible story and was interested exclusively in documentation. She and Owen had worked together briefly during the original Whitfield financial restructuring. She was the most precise legal mind he had ever encountered. He told her everything: the trust, the debt structure, Douglas's instructions, his mother's call. "How long do you want to give this?" Priya asked. "Long enough for the evidence to build itself." 14 months, Priya said. It was not a question. 14 months, he agreed. From that night forward, Owen and Priya conducted a parallel operation, invisible, meticulous, and profoundly patient. A full forensic audit of Whitfield Marine's financial records going back 36 months, careful legal transfers of lien positions, the quiet acquisition through the trust of the outstanding mortgage on the Cole Harbor condominium. Every document filed correctly, every signature notarized, every thread secured, and through all of it, Owen came home on time. He made peregrines on Saturdays. He drove his old Tacoma. He sat on the couch in the evening with project files, saying nothing about the new clothes, the unexplained evenings, the way Tanya had started sleeping with her phone face down on the nightstand, a behavior that, in relationship psychology, is one of the most reliable early indicators of concealed communication. Some nights she came home past midnight. Owen would be reading in the living room. "Long day?" he would say. "Mm-hmm," she would say, and walk past him to the bedroom. He would sit in the quiet, the refrigerator humming, the distant sound of a container ship's horn in the harbor. And he would wind his father's watch and think about patience, about the difference between tolerating something and understanding it, about how the two can look identical from the outside, but feel entirely different from the inside. Hold on, because what Tanya organized 2 weeks after dismissing him from that condominium, and what she staged in the ballroom of the Fairmont Hotel Vancouver to publicly end their marriage in front of 300 people who had known her father, is something you need to hear, because Owen did not merely attend that evening. He arrived. 2 weeks after she told him his services were no longer required, Tanya Beaulieu sent out invitations. Heavy cream cardstock, professionally letterpressed, for an event she called New Horizons. She reserved the main ballroom at the Fairmont Hotel Vancouver, the one with the arched ceilings and the chandeliers that have witnessed a century of significant moments in this city. She spent $14,000 on the event and charged it to the Whitfield Marine corporate account, which she had been treating as a personal expense fund for the better part of 16 months. The guest list exceeded 300, Vancouver's established community, old money families from Shaughnessy and the British properties, business owners, a city councillor, marine industry veterans, senior members from Christchurch Cathedral, people who had known Douglas Whitfield for decades and had watched his daughter grow up at their dinner tables. Each invitation included a handwritten note: "The next chapter begins." She wore a silver gown and a sapphire pendant she had purchased the week after the funeral. She stood at the ballroom entrance with Ryan Fenton beside her, no longer hidden, no longer confined to Thursday evenings and corner tables, and greeted her guests with the broad, confident smile of a woman who believed she had finally stepped into the life she deserved. And then, because a private separation was apparently insufficient, she had her assistant call Owen that morning. The message: Tanya requested his presence at the event. Divorce documents would be available for signature at 9 o'clock, not at a lawyer's office, in a ballroom, in front of 300 people. She wanted witnesses. She wanted Vancouver to see it. When her assistant confirmed Owen would attend, Tanya said, "Good, let him have his moment." Owen spent that Saturday morning at his mother's house in Port Coquitlam. Lorraine made tourtière, the proper kind, with the flaky crust she had been making since before Owen could see over the kitchen counter. He sat at the same table where he had done his homework 30 years ago and watched his mother work. "You nervous?" Lorraine asked without turning from the counter. No, Mayman. She turned and studied him. The long, patient look that takes decades to develop. You sure? He was quiet for a moment. I am sad, Mayman. That is a different thing. Lorraine set down her rolling pin. She walked over and put both hands on his face, the way she had when he was small and trying not to cry. Your father would be proud of you. Douglas would be proud of you. Owen covered one of her hands with his. I know, he said. He left her house at 6:30. At 7:55, a black Lincoln Continental pulled up in front of the Fairmont. Owen stepped out in a charcoal suit, collar open, no tie, composed, unhurried. At his side was Priya Sandhu, carrying a leather portfolio approximately 4 centimeters thick with organized, notarized documentation. The ballroom was warm, full, luminous, the kind of room that makes the world feel ordered and prosperous and correct. Owen moved through it the way he moved through job sites. Steady pace, observant, revealing nothing. He felt the room register his presence. Conversations paused. The older guests, those who remembered the bankruptcy 6 years ago, who knew what this man had sacrificed to save Douglas Whitfield's life's work, watched him cross that ballroom floor, and something in their expressions shifted. Tanya saw him from across the room. Her smile faltered for half a second before she reassembled it. She crossed toward him, champagne flute in hand. Ryan a half step behind. So you came. She said it lightly, for the room's benefit. I thought you might decide to spare yourself. Owen looked at her steadily. Not with anger, not unkindly. With the particular stillness of a man who has nothing left to prove and knows it completely. You invited me, Tanya. I did. She gestured toward a table at the center of the room where a manila envelope rested between floral arrangements. It will take 5 minutes. Before anything else tonight, Owen said, his voice carrying only to their small circle, I want to ask you one question. You have told this room that you inherited $38 million. She lifted her chin. I did. Do you understand what that $38 million actually is? The room, which had been murmuring politely, grew noticeably quieter. Rooms do that when something real is about to happen. Psychologists call it collective attentional narrowing. The entire social environment contracts around a single focal point. Tanya laughed, the bright, hollow sound he recognized from the foyer 2 weeks earlier. It is my father left it to me. Owen held her gaze for one more second. Then he nodded at Priya. Priya Sandhu did not hurry. She set the portfolio on the edge of the banquet table, opened it without theater, and began placing documents in a precise row across the white linen. She spoke without preamble. The Whitfield estate, totaling approximately $38 million in assets, was restructured 22 months ago into a private irrevocable trust. That trust was designed with a matching debt obligation built into its foundation. Every asset in the estate is secured against that debt. She paused. Mr. Owen Beaulieu is the sole beneficiary of the trust. He is also the primary and only creditor. He holds exclusive authority to call the debt due. The room went completely still. Someone near the back set down their glass. Someone else drew a slow breath. Tanya's champagne flute trembled, barely, just enough. That is not possible, she said. Page 4, Priya said evenly, is the trust certification. Filed 22 months ago. Notarized by 3 independent lawyers. Page 9 is the debt assignment documentation. Priya moved to the second stack of papers. This is a separate matter. She set down a bound forensic audit report. Clean white cover. Whitfield Marine letterhead. Over the past 16 months, approximately $2.1 million has been transferred from Whitfield Marine operating accounts into 2 private accounts, one registered to Tanya Beaulieu, one registered to Ryan Fenton, documented through bank records, wire transfer confirmations, and internal accounting records. This constitutes financial fraud. The room broke open, not loudly. This was not a crowd that shouted, but the collective response of 300 people simultaneously understanding what they were witnessing. The intake of breath, the rush of low conversation, the sharp sound of glassware being set down, carried its own weight. The older guests, those who had known Douglas Whitfield since before Tanya was born, who remembered watching Owen quietly rescue the company with his own savings, did not murmur. They looked at Ryan Fenton and then at Tanya, and their faces carried a judgment heavier than anything a court could impose. Ryan had gone the color of old concrete. He looked at the documents, then at the exits. The practiced charm that he carried everywhere had evaporated, replaced by the pinched, calculating expression of a man running contingencies and finding none. Tanya forced a short laugh. Thinner now. You fabricated this. Owen's voice was quiet, almost sorrowful. Tanya, your father loved you, but he knew you and he planned accordingly. Hold on, because what Owen removed from the breast pocket of that charcoal suit is the moment that broke everything open, and it is the moment this entire story has been building toward. There is one additional matter, Priya continued. The way a surgeon continues, not because the procedure is enjoyable, but because the patient requires it. At 2 o'clock this afternoon, Mr. Balya, acting through the trust, completed the legal acquisition of the outstanding mortgage on the Cole Harbor condominium currently registered in Tanya Balya's name. As of this afternoon, that property belongs entirely to Owen Balya. A woman near the front of the room said quietly, "Oh my God, the condominium." The one Tanya had stood in 2 weeks ago, manila envelope in hand, cashmere wrap on her shoulders, and told him his services were no longer required. He had owned it since 2 o'clock. He had owned it while she was having her hair done for this party. Tanya stared at the documents. Her expression moved through disbelief, then rapid calculation, then down to something raw and unprotected. Something she had no rehearsed response for. Real fear. Not the manageable kind. The kind that arrives when you suddenly understand that the ground you were standing on has not existed for a very long time. She looked at Owen. He was already reaching into his breast pocket. What he removed was not a legal document. It was a letter, a single sheet of paper, folded twice, soft at the creases from having been carried and handled many times over 22 months. The handwriting on the outside was unmistakable to anyone in that room who had ever received correspondence from Douglas Whitfield. Careful, upright printing. Each letter formed with the deliberateness of a man who believed that how you wrote reflected how you thought. Written on the outside, in Douglas's hand, for the man who stayed. The room recognized the handwriting before a word was spoken. Owen saw it in their faces. A man in the third row pressed both hands together and bowed his head. Owen unfolded the letter. His hands were steady. He cleared his throat once, simply for the acoustics, and began to read. His voice was low and unhurried. In the silence of that ballroom, it carried to every corner. Owen, my son, if you are reading this aloud, it means she made the choice I was afraid she would make. I am sorry for that. Sorry for you, and deeply sorry for her, because I know what she is losing, even if she does not. No one in the room moved. I built Whitfield Marine with my hands, my father's good name, and 40 years of getting up before the sun. I nearly lost it once. You saved it. Not because you were obligated, not because any contract required it. You saved it because you are the kind of man who protects what he loves and finishes what he starts. Owen's jaw tightened slightly. His voice held. I could not leave this legacy to be consumed. I could not watch what I saw unfolding and call that love for my daughter. Real love does not make room for destruction. It prevents it. He glanced up briefly, not at Tanya, at the older men near the back of the room, the ones who had known Douglas Whitfield for decades. They were nodding slowly. If my daughter ever removes you from your home, and I believe she will, because I know her heart and it grieves me, let her know this. The Whitfield legacy was never built for greed. It was built to endure, to be passed to someone with the loyalty and the wisdom to carry it forward across generations. He folded the letter once. You are that person. You have always been that person. I am proud of you, son. Take care of what we built together. He folded it again. Douglas Whitfield. The room held its silence for 4 full seconds. Then Tanya broke. She had maintained her posture through the entire reading, chin elevated, champagne flute gripped in both hands. every line of her body saying she would not allow this room to see her fall. And then the letter was folded, and her father's voice was somehow in that room, present in a way that had nothing to do with sound. Something in her gave completely. She lunged forward, reaching for the letter with both hands, as though taking possession of the paper could undo what the words had already done. Her heel caught the edge of the carpet runner. She went down hard, one knee, then both. The champagne flute shattering against the marble floor. The sapphire pendant swung forward on its chain and struck her collarbone. She caught herself on both palms, on her hands and knees in the center of that luminous ballroom. The sound that came from her was not words, it was grief. Unguarded, unperformed grief. The kind that does not know it has an audience because it is too enormous to care. The kind that arrives when the last version of the story you have been telling yourself collapses entirely. Across the room, Ryan Fenton had been making a quiet, deliberate movement toward the service corridor near the far wall. He was approximately 4 meters from the door when 2 security officers, coordinated by Priya that afternoon because Priya coordinated everything, stepped forward and filled the doorway. "Mr. Fenton," the taller one said, "please stay where you are." Ryan stopped. He looked at Priya, who was watching him with the composed, unsurprised expression of someone who had anticipated this precise contingency. A hotel staff member helped Tanya to her feet. She was past controlling herself. Her makeup streaked, her hair loosening from its careful arrangement. She looked across the room at Owen, searching his face for something. Anger, satisfaction, the cruelty of a man who has won and wants to make sure the losing hurts. She did not find any of those things. What she found was harder to bear than all of them. Sorrow, plain, genuine, long-worn sorrow. The quiet grief of a man who had loved his wife faithfully for 11 years, watched her choose destruction across 16 months, and had not enjoyed a single moment of being right about where it was heading. "You hid all of this from me." Her voice was stripped of everything practiced. It was the sound of someone finally grasping the full dimensions of what they had missed. Owen was quiet for a moment. "No," he said gently. "I did not hide it from you. I prepared for it. Those are 2 very different things, and I did not do this for revenge. Your father asked me to protect what he built. That is what I did." He held the folded letter for a moment, then returned it to his breast pocket. He looked at her one final time. The long, honest look of a man completing a farewell he had already made his peace with privately. Then he nodded at Priya. She was already on her phone. Security escorted Tanya and Ryan out through the side corridor. The room murmured. The chandeliers burned on. Owen stood at the center of it all and felt, for the first time in 16 months, the settled quiet of something finished. The legal proceedings moved with the efficiency that only happens when the documentation is airtight. Priya filed the civil fraud complaint the Monday morning following the event. The forensic audit had been in final form for 3 weeks. 16 months of work organized into 19 exhibit binders. The BC Supreme Court issued its judgment 5 weeks later. Tanya Beaulieu and Ryan Fenton were ordered jointly to repay the full $2.1 million plus statutory penalties and legal costs within 90 days. Non-compliance would trigger criminal prosecution. There was no viable appeal. Ryan retained a defense lawyer the morning after the event and was, by all accounts, not sleeping. Tanya hired 2 separate lawyers and parted ways with both. Her realistic options had narrowed to 2: pay or face a grand jury. She paid. It required selling things. The luxury SUV purchased the week after the funeral. The wardrobe assembled over 16 months on the Whitfield Marine corporate account. The sapphire pendant, the one she had been wearing when she fell, was appraised and sold to an estate jeweler on South Granville. She moved into a 1-bedroom apartment in New Westminster. Clean building, reasonable neighborhood, the kind of place she would have described 16 months ago as not for someone like her. Ryan Fenton's practice did not survive the proceedings. The BC Securities Commission opened a review, and 2 former clients came forward with complaints that had been sitting in filed grievances for years. He surrendered his license in January. The divorce was finalized quietly. Owen signed the papers on a Thursday afternoon in Priya's conference room. Same table where they had first mapped everything out 16 months earlier. He used a plain black pen. Signed, set the pen down, looked across the table. "Thank you," he said. "You did the work," Priya said. "I filed it." "Still," he said. She held his gaze. For Priya Sandhu, what followed, a faint softening at the corners of her expression, was the professional equivalent of a standing ovation. 3 weeks after the judgment, during a routine procedural call, Tanya's lawyer paused and said, "My client has a personal question, off the record." Priya relayed it to Owen that evening. Tanya's question, "Who is Amara Ose?" She had seen a photograph. Someone who attended the event had posted it on social media, a candid shot taken outside the Fairmont that evening. Owen standing near the car, on his phone, and there, visible through the rear window, a woman sitting quietly, reading. Short natural hair. The composed, unhurried presence of someone entirely comfortable with herself. Amara Ose, 41 years old, pediatrician at BC Children's Hospital. She had a warm, direct manner, a genuine laugh she did not use carelessly, and the particular confidence of a person who has spent years in rooms where steadiness and honesty are not optional. She had first met Owen 5 years earlier at a fundraiser for the hospital's oncology unit. Whitfield Marine had donated materials for a play area renovation. Owen had shown up personally to oversee the installation because that was how he operated. Amara had brought the crew coffee one morning. They had talked briefly about structural engineering and about the particular courage of sick children, and she had walked away thinking, with quiet certainty, that is a very good man. She had held that thought carefully for 5 years, not urgently, not uselessly, just held it the way a careful person keeps something worth keeping. 8 months ago, Owen had called her, a Thursday evening. She was finishing patient charts. He said, "I do not know if you remember me," she said. "I remember you." They had been together ever since, steadily, honestly, without performance. 2 people who knew their own minds, sharing dinners and slow Saturday mornings, and the kind of conversation that reveals what you had been missing without ever saying it directly. They were engaged. The wedding was planned for April. Owen responded to Tanya's question formally, through Priya's office. "Amara Ose is my fiancée. We are to be married in April." Tanya read the response in her new Westminster apartment, sitting on a rented couch, because most of her furniture had been sold. She read it twice. Then she stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the parking lot. She thought about something her father had told her once when she was young, and had been careless with a quiet boy at school who had helped her with a project and received nothing in return. Baby Douglas had said, "The ones who do not make noise are the ones you need to pay the most attention to." She had not paid attention. The morning light over Vancouver in late autumn comes in low and silver through the gaps between the North Shore mountains. Patient light, the kind that does not announce itself but simply arrives, touching the glass towers along the waterfront one by one until the whole city is awake. Owen was on the condominium balcony at 6:15 in the morning. Clean undershirt, sweatpants, a cup of coffee made in the French press Amara had brought over 3 weeks ago and installed on the kitchen counter with the quiet authority of a woman who intends to stay. In his other hand, his father's citizen watch. He turned it over once, checked the face, wound it slowly. The steady tick, a mechanism keeping perfect time regardless of everything happening around it, was one of the most grounding sounds he knew. He looked out at the city, the harbor, the mountains. 4 structures visible from this balcony had been managed by his team. Problems he had solved before dawn, with steel-toed boots and a notepad. He thought about his father. He thought about Douglas. He thought about what it costs a man to pour himself quietly into the people and things he loves consistently, without recognition. And how it is enough anyway. How it has always been enough. He said it softly. to the skyline and to no one and to everyone. "I did it, Dad." The glass door slid open behind him, the soft, unhurried sound of bare feet on the balcony tile. Then Amara slipped her arms around him from behind, her chin against his shoulder, her warmth against his back, holding on with the easy certainty of someone who has nowhere else to be and no interest in being anywhere else. They stood like that, watching the harbor together. Then she said, her voice warm and carrying a trace of amusement, "The guest bedroom still has no curtains." "I know. And the kitchen faucet has been dripping since Monday." "I know that too. And your mother has called me 3 times this week about the wedding flowers. She has mentioned peonies in every single conversation. I want to make sure we are aligned on the peonies." Owen laughed, a real full laugh. The kind that comes from somewhere below the ribs. The kind that had been scarce for 16 months and was now, quietly but unmistakably, returning. "Tell her she can have all the peonies she wants." Amara reached past him and handed him a second cup of coffee. She had brought 2. She always brought 2 because she paid attention to small things and always had. "Are you all right?" she asked, not with worry, with the honest, direct care of someone who wanted a true answer. He considered it fully. "Yes," he said, "I genuinely am," and he was. Not the performance of being all right, not the composed exterior of a man pushing through. Actual peace. The specific, settled stillness of a person who has carried a heavy thing for a long time, set it down carefully, and walked forward without looking back. Lorraine Beaulieu arrived at 11 the way she always did on Sundays, carrying a covered dish, tourtière with the flaky crust, the one Owen had been requesting since he was 7. Wearing her good church dress and the expression of a woman who had been correct about everything and was far too gracious to mention it, she set the dish on the counter, looked around the condominium, the one her son now owned outright, the one his wife had told him to vacate on a clear September evening while the mountains held the last of the light. She was quiet for a moment. Then she walked to where Owen was standing, took his face in both hands, and held it. "I am proud of you," she said. "You already told me that, Maimon. I will keep telling you until it reaches all the way inside you." She released him and looked past him at Amara. "Now, the guest bedroom has no curtains. That is not acceptable. We are fixing that today." Amara laughed from across the kitchen, a warm, unguarded laugh that filled the room easily. Lorraine winked at her. The peony negotiations resumed within minutes. Later that afternoon, while Lorraine and Amara worked through centerpiece details with the cheerful intensity of 2 women who have found each other genuinely delightful, Owen stood once more at the balcony railing, watch in hand. City below. He let himself think of Tanya, not with bitterness, not with triumph, but with the honest, quiet grief of a man who loved someone for a long time and watched that person choose poorly over and over until there was nothing left to choose. He did not hate her. He did not wish her further hardship. He simply accepted, with the full weight of a man who no longer had anything to prove, what was true. She had held something rare and real and discarded it because she had mistaken his quietness for weakness and his patience for lack of ambition. She had looked at a man building something extraordinary in the background of her life and seen only a man standing still. He wound the watch one last time, tucked it into his pocket, went inside to join his family. This story was written by a human, with AI as a companion. It was born from a simple wish to reawaken the belief that kindness still exists. And no matter how many trials life brings, there are always moments of justice and quiet miracles waiting for those who deserve them.